Welcome to the Owl Podcast. This is Jerry Gonzalez, and I'm here with Jameson McMillan.
Hello.
Jameson, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Jerry?
Good, good. So this is our inaugural episode, and for our first episode, since we're new podcasters, I kind of just wanted to get a good, you know, set the groundwork for what we're doing and why we want to start this podcast. So Jameson, if you want to take it away as to what you want to accomplish with this podcast and a little bit of your political leanings and also why you want to start the podcast.
Sure. So yeah, as Jerry said, I'm Jameson. Reason I thought this would be kind of fun to do is just, I thought, the person I originally invited, Jerry, and then also Willie, we're just three guys that we have pretty similar views on things, but we're also different enough that I think we could have good conversations on any subject, whether it be political, comedy, conspiracy, whatever. We could go down a whole bunch of different avenues, and I thought we could have a lot of fun just doing it. So my main thought with this is just, one, to have fun, two, to just kind of have good conversations, which I think is personally a lost art amongst a lot of people. They don't have conversations anymore. It just kind of turns into, all right, let's look at our phones, let's text, let's email, whatever. So it's kind of one of those, like I said, lost
arts.
Yes, exactly.
So how would you describe yourself politically?
Politically, I describe myself pretty libertarian. I'm all about individual freedoms, letting the states do a lot of their own decision making, things like that, and keeping the federal government essentially out of everyday personal things. And then just very much in favor of capitalism and the free market and letting things run, especially just down that aisle there. I have more conservative leanings on some things, and I'm a little more liberal on some of the other things, but mostly right down the middle there with the libertarian type thought. What about you?
So for me, I would have to split it into two. Foreign policy, I would classify myself, I align very closely with neoconservatism, and we can go into what neoconservatism means, but roughly it means that you think democracy and liberal values should spread to everybody in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it shouldn't just be idiosyncratic to the West or America or the British Isles, right? So that's where I would align with foreign policy. More on the economic policy domestically, I would align with libertarians. I think the free market and free market values, capitalism has shown, especially ethical capitalism, has shown that it can solve most of the world's problems. There's a few outliers and big outliers like healthcare, things like that the free market tends to not solve. But
Sure.
For the most part, I think domestically, the free market can solve most of our issues. So that's just kind of our background, where we're at. And so, from here, I think we can delve into a little bit of our influences. What would you say is your biggest influencer? If you have to name three books that influence you, this is a good question that Jamie Weinstein asks in the National Review podcast. Three books that influence your life the most. Like, what would you say influence you? And I'm asking this mostly to kind of shape you as a person. To figure
Sure.
out and kind of get a good baseline to who you are as a person. What you think. How you look at things. Things like that. So
Okay. I mean, as far as books that have influenced me, a little bit more of my background is I was raised in a very conservative, very religious family growing up. So one of the books that obviously was pushed into me a lot as the kid was the Bible. And it's interesting, the more and more that I read the Bible growing up, the more and more different ideas and things like that it started producing for me. But it actually kind of leaned me away from the actual religion aspect of things and actually kind of more of just an individual relationship with God. So I'd say that is probably one of the biggest influences on me, but it not in the sense that a lot of people have, like Catholics, Protestants, things like that, as it's like, okay, this is my guideline, this is who I am as a person, this is the grounds that I need to follow. So I'd say that in the sense that it just really actually opened me up to questioning a lot of different things, like questioning modern day religion and questioning everything that's surrounded with the Bible. I'm like, okay, that's interesting.
So
but
that the Bible,
Mhm.
did the Bible lead you to question things, or you're just your own kind of innate personality? You were just kind of questioning the Bible.
So it probably led me to go down more, I don't know, diverse paths, more, I don't know, best way to phrase this, but maybe to get away from the actual organized religion and just try to find my own path there. So I'd say the Bible was definitely a big influence on me, just because it did lead me to question a lot of different things, and I think probably not in the original intent that the people that wrote the Bible were intending.
Yeah.
So that's probably just me being curious, probably open mind, more just looking out there. Other books that have kind of influenced me in the past.
I think just maybe keep it to 3, or
Okay.
so 2 more.
Yeah, 2 more. Other books that have influenced me in the past. Hard to say, but I really have always loved C.S. Lewis. Chronicles of Narnia and stuff like that. I know it's another one that has a lot of religious topics and stuff like that behind it. But
Because he was religious, right?
He was very religious.
So was Tolkien.
Exactly. Tolkien actually had a lot of influence in, religion and things like that as well.
Yeah.
But
So are you able to divorce the religious aspect of certain things with the moral teachings of, if you are able to pick through the carcass of the Bible, right? And say, okay, well, I find this moral, but I find this immoral, right? Are you able to divorce the religious aspect versus what you would find as moral, what C.S. Lewis would teach?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say that's absolutely correct, because I don't believe anywhere that I've read in anywhere in the Bible or any of C.S. Lewis's books or anything like that where he teaches actually anything like, hey, yes, gay marriage is wrong.
Yeah.
Hey, yes, you absolutely need to go ahead out there and procreate and create more babies, things like that, which a lot of the people in the church have essentially, that's more the man-made type thing.
Yeah.
I think that's where it just starts coming to be like who you are as an individual and what you can actually start believing in different things. But yeah, I'd say that's kind of the path that I just took, is like, you look at it and be like, I don't think gay marriage is wrong.
Yeah.
And
that's where your libertarian
Yeah, exactly.
kind of come in and be like,
and that's just,
well, even if the Bible teaches me that, gay marriage is wrong or anything like that, I would disagree with those teachings, because as a libertarian, I would more lean on the side of letting people choose what they want to be versus me imposing whatever it is that I think.
Bingo. And then any other books that have influenced me?
Yeah, so one last book. So that's a tough one, because I think always tough to whittle it down to a final book. So I'll start off, right off that. Maybe this will jog your memory a little bit. So one of the biggest influences that I've had is 1984 by George Orwell.
Oh, yes.
So George Orwell, this is right around the time, about 3 years ago, when I was really getting into the Iraq War, and I was really reading about what the causes were, why people were so advocating so strongly for the Iraq War, right? And I read a lot. I used to be, somebody who was passionately against the Iraq War. I thought, drone strikes and everything, an invasion of countries would just create more jihadists, and we would just have more turmoil. So I started reading more and more about George Orwell, and it struck me, it just caught me at the right kind of stream, because I started reading more and more about, and George Orwell captures this perfectly, what totalitarianism is. And that's what was going on in Iraq, was complete totalitarianism, right? You had a regime and a despot, and really a megalomaniac in Saddam Hussein, who would, control people, who would torture people. You read about, if you thought Abu Ghraib was bad under the Americans, it was nothing compared to what was happening with Saddam Hussein, right?
Sure.
And so George Orwell was the first time in 1984 that I read a totalitarian book that really captured what it was like to live in a totalitarian society. And I remember very distinctly reading about when kids would say just an off-the-cuff remark and would actually, kind of just imprison their parents, because they would say, "Oh, my daddy said this," right? And what do you mean your daddy said this? Well, he just said this off-the-cuff remark, and all of a sudden you're in jail because you spoke out against the leader, right? And I don't know if you remember that from 1984, but the fact that children could say something that they overheard their parents speaking about just caught me. I've never thought about that. So 1984 was just such a big influence, because it really shined a light on something that I had no knowledge on, right? It showed me for the first time how totalitarian systems really work, right? It showed me that's what it means to be totalitarian, right? You have to have doublethink, right? You have to be able to simultaneously hold ideas that don't make sense, right? You have to love the dear leader but hate the dear leader, right? And that's why 1984 is so special to me, right? That's one of the biggest influences that I've ever had. So that's the first book. don't know if that jogged anything in your memory as far as the third book goes. Um, but I would say second book that really just, kind of was one of my main influences was Lord of the Rings. And not really for its message, but mostly in how it was written. I read Lord of the Rings so many times. I've read it about 1,000 times, and that's not hyperbolic, right? I've read it close to about 1,000, hundreds of times easily. But just I started studying the style, how Tolkien would develop his stories, how Tolkien would describe his scenery, and that was just one of the best ways to learn, really from a master of the English language, how to write and how to read a book and how to set up a story and all these things, and that's one of the biggest influences in my life. And you can also get into Tolkien was a very religious person. He was a devout Catholic, and a lot of the stories that he chose for the elves, for example, that people that go to heaven go to eternal life. Man is kind of in sin and has to deal with mortal life.
Sure.
You can get into a lot of the stories and how Tolkien's Catholicism influenced him, but that was just one of the biggest books that influenced my life. So I don't know if you have a reaction to that.
Actually, it's funny you bring it up, because one of the very first books I ever read for school, and it was like a book report type thing, was The Hobbit. It was just so good because it covered, when I was a kid, everything that I loved. It had dragons, it had trolls, it had elves, it had dwarfs, it had everything that you could possibly want in a book, and it just kept me so entertained and just so excited throughout the entire book that it's probably one of, if not maybe the favorite book I've ever read.
Yeah.
Because it was just such a good book, and it's one of the few books that I have read, I don't know if I'd say hundreds of times, but maybe at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
And it's such a good book, and it's Tolkien he is just a fantastic author.
Yeah.
I've only read the Lord of the Rings series once. But The Hobbit is definitely just one of those books that I just loved the first time I read it. And it was I wouldn't say it was maybe like a huge influence on me, but it was just one of those books that really got me passionate about reading and just really getting me into just kind of having fun.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's one of the books that made me fall in love with reading was The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, because it was so well written, and it's kind of difficult to go from what I consider really good writing to kind of just the rest, where it's like you have to struggle, and you really get a sense of what bad books are.
Yeah.
Because I've read a lot of bad books, and
Sure.
you watch a lot of bad movies, and you immediately know this is a bad movie, right? You watch a bad show, and you know this is a terrible show, right? And you kind of it's like going from The Office to like the worst shitty comedy that you've seen, right? And that's kind of there's a bit of an analogy that where you go from very well written English professor of literature that knows how to set up stories to just shitty books that you have to get through, and you're like, god damn it. And that's especially true of some of the classics that I've read. Like some of the classic books that I've read, none of them really come to mind, but I've read a few classic books that are supposedly the best books that top 10 books that you should read, and all of a sudden you're reading and you're like, this is really good. It doesn't make any sense, but so I would say, just to cap it off, my third book that, especially in more recent times, that really influenced me was Ron Chernow's Washington book. And that was the best biography I've ever read, because it really put you in the mindset of who Washington was, and you really got to know him as a person. And I can tell you now, verbatim, who Washington was, the person, who he felt he was, and how he rose to certain occasions. And not to stretch it out too much, but just how important Washington was to the Union and the start of this democracy. And it's such an important person to read. And so that would be, to cap it off, my third book for most heavily influenced books.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great place to start right there.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get into the culture wars a little bit. And just a little bit of a setup here. The culture wars mean to me that there is some inexorable topic that both sides just can't get around. Like both sides are so set in their ways that no matter how much arguing happens, we just can't get past certain things, and that creates an all-out loser or winner-take-all situation where morality, starts to be just kind of tossed to the side, and we forget how to have conversations. We just it's a winner-take-all scenario, and a good example of this, I guess, would be. Good example of the culture wars would be.
What about what's going on with the campuses in a lot of the United States?
Yeah, free speech, especially free speech. But I feel like that's too easy. Let's dive right into it. I think a good example of the culture wars and how people feel about the differences between liberty is the gay wedding cake fiasco.
Sure.
That happened, right? So if you don't know the gay wedding cake fiasco, a gay couple goes into a bakery in Colorado and they ask them to bake a cake, and the baker, based on his religious beliefs, says, no, I can't bake that for you because I'm gay, or you're gay, and I'm a Christian, and it goes against my morality and my ethics to say that I should bake for you. So right off the bat, people are inclined, especially on the left, to think that the state has a right or should protect consumers and should protect people that are, that people would consider downtrodden, right? Gays, LGBT communities, right? And they're using all sorts of tactics, right? Kind of, totalitarian tactics, and saying the state should intervene and it should force the baker to bake the cake for them. So, that's a good setup. Kind of what do you think, or what are your thoughts on the baking situation?
So the baking situation, I think, is a little weird in the sense that it seems like the couple that were looking for this cake were almost going out of their way to find somebody that they could essentially make a case against. And I had a problem with that, just in the fact that just seems like they were looking for trouble. And I don't like when anybody goes out there and they're looking for trouble.
But even if they were looking for trouble, like, is that really, like, if you're, okay, like, let's say you're going out and you're trying to prove a point,
mm-hmm.
right? You're, and the analogy is inevitably going to come up, so I'm going to bring it up. Right, you're a black person in 1950s, and you're Rosa Parks, right? You stand at the front of the bus, right? Why is she wrong to point out? And I'm not calling it an injustice because Rosa Parks was different, but
sure,
are they wrong for going out and pointing out bigotry?
So I guess the problem that I have with this whole scenario is that I agree that it's kind of tricky. It's a very tricky path to walk down there. Do I think bigotry is wrong? Absolutely. Do I think that anybody that's obviously discriminating against a black, a gay, anybody of the LGBTQ, whatever the community there.
The letters.
I think that's wrong, absolutely. But the way I look at it is, if I was in their situation, I would have been a little pissed. Yes, like, oh, okay, you're not going to make a cake for me because I'm gay? Well, F you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm a firm believer in the free market, that at that point I would have been like, okay, you know what? You're not getting my business, and I'm going to go on to Yelp. I'm going to go on to Google reviews. I'm going to go on to whatever, and I'm just going to go ahead and blast you and say, this is why I'm never going to go back to you, X, Y, and Z. And then I'm going to go down the street. I'm going to find another baker, because there's literally hundreds of bakers within Colorado.
So what if that doesn't work? So I tend to agree with you, but I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Because what if that doesn't work? What if you go on to Yelp and you're in a community where people tend to side with the baker, right? What if you're in a very heavily Christian community, right? What if you're in a community that doesn't particularly care for gay people, and they say, okay, well, you know what, the baker, I tend to agree with the baker, right? And we're a small community, we're only 60,000 people big,
sure,
and I stand with my community baker, right?
Okay.
What do you do then? Because it is difficult as a person to move, right? Most people don't move. Most people
Sure.
stay where they're born. And what do you do as a gay person there if no baker is going to bake for you, right? Everybody takes a stand, right? Makes a big deal in community news, and the market, however we would want the market to influence, decision making, it doesn't work, right? The social ostracism doesn't work. This chastising, right? That doesn't work. You go on Yelp, you go on Google, and you say, look what these people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that they're their homophobic acts are wrong, and people say, I don't care. I legitimately don't care because my religion says that I should be against gay people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do then? Like how do you combat something when the market isn't working for you, when the market isn't as moral as you would like it to be, right?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's the loaded podcast. Loaded potato podcast.
I mean, there's so much to that right there. I would like to have faith in the free market, though. I would say that yes, because you are clearly not going to bake a cake for a gay couple for their wedding. That there's going to be enough people out there that are going to see the wrong in that they're not going to know, they're not going to support your business, or they're going to support businesses that do make cakes for that couple. I think, like I said, to bring it back around, it was gone about all wrong, as in the whole sense of like they went out looking for somebody to make a scene. I think that's a problem. But when it comes out to, is it a community that's 50 to 60,000 people, and let's say 40,000 of them are very Christian, very conservative, very like anti-gay marriage, that does make it very tricky, and that's, I personally don't know what you would do in that situation, but I would hope that you would express your First Amendment rights at that point.
Here would be a good question to ask for you is, should the government step in at that point?
I don't think the government should step in a lot of different situations that they've...
But here specifically, if everybody in the community is ostracizing these gay people and saying, no, you know what, we're not going to bake a cake for you. We're refusing you service solely based on your sexual preference.
Well, that's strange because you got to look at it from so many different aspects. So the First Amendment protects the freedom of religion. So are they essentially expressing their freedom of religion at that point? Because if they're making it a religion issue, like saying, my religion personally does not condone gay marriage, is that still protected under the first right? Or is it essentially, or First Amendment, excuse me, or is that another aspect where you're going onto the free speech, we're saying, like, I personally don't agree with this at that point.
And I think freedom of religion and freedom of speech are, you can't separate the two. I think they're linked, no matter how hard you try, right?
Sure.
Your freedom of religion has to mean your freedom of speech.
Agreed.
And I don't know quite what the answer is, because you have to have some way to protect a consumer, right? You have to have some way where people are protected and you can go into a business and not be discriminated against, right? If I go into a business, as a white guy, tall European looking dude, right? And I'm, discriminated against for whatever reason, right? I would feel, kind of aghast. I would say, what the hell is happening here?
Sure.
Right? And so I would want somebody, but not necessarily the government, to step in and say, no, you have to serve this person. Like, you can't just discriminate. But I'm also, in principle, and just kind of, outside of the situation, just thinking, we shouldn't have the government step in and try to control everyday life.
Well, I guess
right?
at that point, where does it end?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because
so where does your free and religion is such a loose term, because religion can mean anything. If your religion is, I hate Jewish people, right, or whatever it is, but there's no difference here. And religion is such a loose term, and how are you the judge of what religion is? How are you the person that says, oh, this is religion, this is not religion? Now, this is an impossible job to have, right? And so how do you ask the federal government to come in and say, well, yep, this, I figured it out, I'm the arbiter and I know what religion is? That's impossible to say. And so I think it is such a difficult question, and I would tend to stay away from government intervening in the affairs of private business, but it is difficult when the free market doesn't work or behave the way that you would want it to behave.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, I guess that does bring up the whole culture wars that we're talking about, is where exactly does it end? Because if you start having the government step in on something like this, what's the next thing that they're going to go ahead and step in on?
Yeah.
Are they going to say, things like, I don't like what you're saying, I'm going to consider that hate speech, and now I'm going to consider hate speech under, X, Y, and Z law as
So
something you
they
can't do.
tried to do that in Canada, and this is why Jordan Peterson got so famous. They tried to do that in Canada with not Bill, it's not a bill. It's just kind of like a, hey, we're hoping to do
With
this.
the whole pronouns thing.
Yeah,
Right?
and this is why Jordan Peterson got famous with, I guess, announcement C16. And they were saying you have to use correct pronouns when you're dealing with people. And Jordan Peterson said, no, I'm not going to have the government mandate who I'm going to call. If I call that person a him and he's a Q, what the fuck? I'm not going to get in trouble for that.
Sure.
Right? And so that is kind of the absurd reality of what, trying to get the government too involved in certain things, right? That obviously the government has no role in enforcing things that they want you to say. Like, you should have absolute. The government can't come in right now to this house and say, hey, hold on, you can't talk about these things, right? That's a ridiculous proposition, right? And that's what the left was proposing in large part, right? They're saying you have to call these people what we want you to call them, right?
Right.
And so that is a ridiculous proposition, and we can't have that, right? We need individual liberties, and so that does tap into the culture wars, because the left seems to think that you can use government to just enforce civil liberties, right? You can just enforce. Is there discrimination? Up. Let's get the government involved, right? You have to follow what the government says, and it is a little bit totalitarian, right? It is a little bit. I don't want to say fascist, but there's no really other word for it. But it is, it is totalitarian in a sense. You do want authority to come in and say, nope, we're going to control what you're able to say, right? And so that is kind of the inexorable part of this, is where you're either standing with liberty or you're standing with people that almost for a good cause want something good in civil liberties, but are you going about it the wrong way?
Yeah. All right. So you keep bringing up, like, this is what the left says. This is what the left says in this. Maybe we should, just to be fair, what do we think the right says on this?
Well, the right is what, bacon Christians are saying, right? Is that they're refusing people their service, and they're saying it on the basis of their religious liberties, right? And that has a problem when you are denying people, because it is, you can reduce this kind of reductio ad absurdum about this and say, okay, well, I'm going to deny, if you're in Seattle and I'm a very secular society, I'm going to deny all Christians the right to eat at my restaurant, right? And so Christians, and I use the word, kind of interchangeably with the right.
Sure.
The right is playing a dangerous game by denying people just their basic right to be at a business, right? And it's not a game that they necessarily want to play, because the right is so. I think the right is just so interchangeable with Christianity, and that's kind of what I mean by the right.
Okay.
Right, and so that's where I would tap into the culture war things. Is the right wants to believe that we should implement more religious aspects into our daily lives, and the left tends to think that we should just protect, in a very totalitarian sense, what we perceive as a downtrodden. So that's what I would describe the culture wars as.
Makes sense. So to bring it back around, then, you kind of put me on the spot with, what would I do in this situation? What would you do?
What would I do with?
So let's say, for example, you're now the gay person, and you're wanting to get this cake, and you're now in a community that's, say, 90% Christian majority, but you're hoping for the free market to essentially take place and really just win this over. But yet, so many people in your community are supporting this baker.
Yeah, and that's kind of where you're fucked.
Yeah.
Where you're like, well, fuck, like, I'm not gonna move to a different city. Like, if I'm in the middle of Arkansas, right, and you're in a very predominantly Christian nation or city, it's unfair to ask you to drive 2 hours to just get a fucking cake.
Sure.
Right? And that's where I kind of do side a little bit with, the protecting the consumer, where you're like, okay, well, just bake the fucking cake for them. right? And you do feel a little bit of sympathy for the gay couple, where you're like, okay, just
Yeah,
bake the cake, like,
absolutely.
and all of my instincts say, no, don't force people, don't force businesses to do what they say, but that empathy kicks in, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, like, it's unfair to ask them to drive however many miles to say, okay, you should get your cake, right?
Hmm.
And so that's where where I think it is so interesting, and such a difficult topic, because there is no really right answer. It's just kind of, it has to kind of be case by case, right? You have to look at a situation and go, okay, well, yeah, that person probably should have baked the cake for him, and
So the decision was made by the Supreme Court, though, that the cake should, or that the baker was in the right,
yeah.
and that he did not have to bake that cake for this couple. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think that was a good decision. I don't think the government should step in and force businesses to conduct business that they don't want to conduct, because we do have enough movement to where people are less inclined to discriminate,
Hmm.
right? We're no longer living in the 1960s where people in the South were readily just discriminating with whites only bathrooms or things like that,
Sure.
right? And so we do have enough of that lingering equity in our minds where we're like, okay, we're not going to discriminate, and this is why we're not going to discriminate, right? And so we have made enough progress, I guess, in that sense there. But yeah, I could very easily see a situation where the market does fail us, right? Where the market doesn't behave as we would want it to behave.
Which sucks, considering you and me are both big components of the free market and
Yeah.
actually believing in its success.
Yeah.
Because I, I believe that capitalism, the free market, honestly, is what made us the most wealthy and
Yeah.
successful country in the history of the world.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, you're right.
And anybody that adopts these values becomes one of the wealthiest countries in the world that ever existed, right?
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be like, right. Look at somebody like Singapore, who adopts free market capitalism and becomes incredibly wealthy,
Right.
right? And so the free market works, but in these very kind of esoteric cases, it doesn't work, and you kind of have to really pick it apart and figure out what works and what doesn't work and what's moral, because our morality doesn't always align with what the market wants, right? And so we kind of have to, there's always this duel that we have where we have to bend the market towards ethics and morality versus just straight up capitalism where it's laissez-faire and we'll just make as much money as we want, right? And so
Yeah. So to bring it back around with the culture wars in America, then, so bringing it back to the free speech aspect of things on campuses, how do you feel about a lot of the people now starting to protest essentially different speakers or different guests or something like that coming upon the campuses? And I'll give you an example. I know Ben Shapiro is a big hot point for a lot of campuses. He'll come onto a campus and he'll be greeted with a lot of different hostility and just protests and things like that. And I believe that's because, personally, a lot of campuses now are having a very, it sounds terrible when I say this, but a very left-leaning, very tolerance type approach to things. What are your thoughts on that, I guess?
well, to answer your question, I think protesting speakers makes sense if you don't agree with what they're saying, but I think in general I stand with just liberty. I think you should allow people to speak and just debate their ideas, and you shouldn't try to shut them down. You shouldn't try to get them kicked off the campus, and you should, obviously this goes without saying, right? It's an empty platitude, but you shouldn't use violence to kick people out of campuses, right? And you see this, it's kind of prevalent throughout college campuses where people are just yelling at the top of their lungs to kind of get these people kicked off, right? Like what happened with Brett Weinstein. This is happening a lot to Jordan Peterson. This is happening a lot to Dave Rubin. You should allow people to speak, and you should question their method or their ideas versus using violence and resorting to violence.
Agreed. And I think the biggest issue that I've had with a lot of the college campuses is that when they have a speaker like Ben Shapiro or Charlie Kirk or somebody like that, that they essentially have very strong right-leaning opinions, people will come to their shows, or like I said, they'll protest and try to get these people kicked off the campus. But not only that, during their shows, they'll essentially try to obstruct their free speech.
Yeah.
That I think is anything. Not only is it just rude, but it's not how civilized people have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's not how you're going to get ideas to pass. It's basically just trying to prevent them from speaking, which I think is terrible, because everybody has their right to say whatever they believe, whether or not you agree with it.
And I think here would be a good time to delineate what we mean by free speech. Free speech is both under the law and to some extent, but it also is a culture of free speech. We should allow people to say anything that they want to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not protected under the First Amendment necessarily, because the Supreme Court has kind of muddied the waters a little bit. The judge Oliver Wendell Holmes, for example, was famous for saying you don't scream fire in a crowded theater when he was speaking about Yiddish-speaking socialists that were advocating against the First World War, right? He threw them in jail because they were saying we shouldn't go to war with all these imperial powers. And we should say that free speech, when we mean free speech, it's a culture of free speech, of allowing anybody to say anything that they want to say. I don't know how you feel about it, and this would be a good way to get you to react to this. I am a free speech absolutist,
mm-hmm.
but there are some obvious exceptions. You can't go around, and this, you could, kind of cloudy this a little bit with images and stuff like that, but I don't think you should just be allowed to put up pornography of other people, for example, and say, this is free speech, right?
Sure.
You should be able to say almost anything that you want to say, with obvious exceptions. But I'm free speech absolutist, obviously, but there's like one or two exceptions where you can't obviously put up images of certain things. But
I would say I would agree with that. The only other areas that I would draw, essentially a barrier, is when it comes to calling for physical violence. Like, let's say if, for example, I don't agree with what you're saying, and I essentially try to get a mob out there to come over and just start essentially calling for violence against Jerry.
Yeah.
Like, I don't agree with what Jerry says, let's go and cut off his head. Exactly. So I think that's obviously another parameter. I agree with the pornography aspect of things. There's definitely things that I would say.
So what's your take on like the imagery thing though? Like burning the flag, for example.
Okay.
So that's a very powerful image. People are speaking out. They're however.
It's easy to say on that one because the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of that is protected under their First Amendment.
Yeah.
Do I agree that that's the best form of protesting anything?
But do you think that should be protected?
I do.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to certain aspects of things that they shouldn't be protected. Like, for example, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was a center fielder for, was it the Cubs maybe? But there was a gentleman that ran out onto the field, was trying to essentially light the American flag on fire. The center fielder ran over, picked it up, and then ran away. I think both of those expressions right there should be protected. Yes, his is protected there because he tried to burn the American flag because he disagreed with whatever he was saying, and I think the center fielder should also be protected because he felt like it was protecting the American flag for what he believed. So, I mean, I definitely see that there's both aspects, and they both should be protected, but like I said, the only parameters I would ever draw any type of, or the only thing I would say like you can't do is when you're calling for physical violence against somebody, or encouraging child pornography or sex trafficking.
And that's where the Supreme Court would step in and say,
and that's just one of those things that I don't think you can really find anybody that's going to disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
I mean, but when it comes to something like, if I wanted to say, I think Trump is the worst president that's ever existed, I think his Twitter account should be deleted, and I think that, he should just stop doing whatever it is that he does. I don't know. You could go on a million different tangents with that.
So
I think that should be protected under the First Amendment. But if I was starting to be like, I think Trump should be assassinated, that is a whole different ballpark right there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's right at that point.
Yeah, and you do get into some gray areas.
Yeah.
Because I don't think if you do say, oh, I hope Trump dies or something like that, I don't think that's. But if you're like telling somebody go assassinate somebody, I think that's where then you're calling for you have a call to action.
Yes, exactly.
At that point.
But I mean, anything literally from calling physical violence
a call to action.
Exactly.
Yeah. That
should be protected, and I'm completely in favor of that. But when you're doing whatever you can also to silence somebody's free speech, like I said, you showing up at a Ben Shapiro or Charlie Cook, or even on the opposite end, if Bill Maher shows up at a college campus, and there's a bunch of conservatives there that are trying to essentially silence whatever he's saying, I don't think that is right, because they do have the right to say whatever it is that they want to say, as long as it's within those parameters of not actually calling for physical violence or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I would definitely agree.
And I think that's where the culture war is starting to get a little shady, because people on both sides of the aisle think that they can say, no, you can't do this because I disagree with it. I mean, I think the NFL, with the whole, kneeling during the flag, that's a perfect example right there. Personally, do I agree with it? No. Am I going to die on that sword? No. But, I think there's little differences as far as, okay, they're actually at work. Maybe that's not the best place to do their actual protest. But it's, that seems like a very, very right side argument right there, where they're like, no, you're disrespecting the American flag. You should not be able to do that type of stuff. And the left's like, hey, whatever, do what you want. Maybe, I don't know. There might be some left-leaning people that disagree with that.
Yeah.
To be fair, I don't know. But that just seems like what it is.
That is a good place to kind of sort of describe because the culture wars are difficult to describe, and especially when you have to pick a moment. But the NFL thing is kind of a perfect example of what culture wars are, and we have two sides. We have one side that thinks something outrageous about
Coasters
police.
are ridiculous.
Yeah, we have one side that thinks outrageous things about police, and another side that thinks we have to protect the American flag under all instances. And I think that does get into where we are just sort of not meshing well with liberals. I use the word liberal and progressive very interchangeably, but progressive are just kind of, they're so inundated in their own world, and conservatives are so in their own world that we're not meeting correctly. And we're just kind of, we have such different ideas, and when we do finally clash, like there's these explosions, and we're just like, what the fuck do you mean, and what the fuck do you mean, like, and that I think is kind of, it's hard to define what culture wars are, but it's definitely happening, and it when you see it to an extent. So
I think it's a good way to describe it is if it gives you some kind of emotional reaction to it one way or another.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people are obviously, like I said, having very strong emotional reactions to seeing people kneel during the national anthem.
Yeah.
And they're seeing it as a disgrace, or that you're not supporting our troops, or that you're not supporting our country. And like I said, I'm all for people protesting however they see fit, as long as it's peacefully. There's a time and a place. Do I think that the sitting during the national anthem while you're being paid to be there, and you've had people that's paid to come and see this game, is the best place to do it? Not necessarily. But I'm not going to also sit there and try and go and stop them, It's one of those things. I think it does honestly just, when it comes to the culture war, it's when it's causing emotional reaction, and it's trying to essentially cause a division between you versus me type thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I don't know if it's necessarily causing a division. I just think it's people that are talking past one another. And because if you really think about it, NFL players are kneeling for some perceived injustice towards black people on black cops, right? And the right, I'm just going to use the terms interchangeably here. The left sees it as an injustice towards black people from cops. The right sees it as you're disrespecting America, right? So there's not really communication here. There's not really, even though I think both sides are wrong. I really do. I don't see it as like just we're not talking to one another, and it's a problem, and it's causing divisions that are unnecessary. And Trump is the best example of these divisions, just kind of writ large, where we're in, and Bernie Sanders too, where we're in an age of American populism, where people are just going to take very popular ideas and just kind of espouse them and say, this is what I'm going to fix for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Bernie Sanders is famous for this. I'm going to fix your minimum wage. Right? No, you're
Right.
not. You asshole. No, you're not.
It just can't be done.
You're not. No, Thomas Sowell. Like, literally, I don't know if you know who Thomas Sowell is. He's the black conservative, economist. He's famous for this. He says your minimum wage thing causes more harm than what you're actually trying to accomplish, right? And so Bernie Sanders is obviously full of shit, but he's a populist, and he was a very popular person, and so was Trump. Trump was a very popular person because he said a lot of things that people wanted to hear. I'm gonna preserve the borders, right? Fuck Muslims, right? A lot of these things, right? And so that's where I think the culture war has just kind of split us, is that both sides just want to hear what they want to hear, and they're not going to take the other side into consideration, and that's a problem. That's a legitimate problem, and maybe it's an injustice to call it culture wars, because it's not one side fighting against the other. It's just both sides just ruminating on what they think is right and what they're concerned about, and when they do inevitably clash, they're like, wow, what the fuck are you saying? Like, no, this is not a problem. Right? So lefties get up there and they go, cops are murdering black people. No, they're not. What the fuck are you talking about? But to them, it's such a real, visceral problem, right? And it's not a problem to anybody that studies this in depth, right? You just have what you have in police societies. Yes, you have the occasional fuck up, right? You have an occasional cop that fucks up and is not clearly shouldn't be on the force, right?
Sure.
Like, and yes, you have a lot of police shootings, and I think that is a real problem. But they're not murdering black people at a rate that is alarming, right? But the left is just inundated. They just think this is a problem and nothing else matters, right? And so when they bring it out into mainstream culture and it reaches us, we go, no, that's not a problem. They just fucking get all bent out of shape about it. And so that would be a better way of describing what's happening culturally in America, is just people are so caught up in their own issues, and they're not. And when it does clash with society, they go, pay attention to this, and if you're not paying attention to this, you're a fucking asshole.
Or you're a racist, bigot, homophobe.
Yeah, you're
whatever,
a racist, whatever the fuck it is, that you want to call somebody. And so, that would be a better way of describing it. It's not culture wars, because we're not warring against each other. It's just people that think that something is an issue, and they introduce it to other people, and we're all like, no, it's not. But they're so caught up in it that
it's almost like their idea is so embedded in them that if you're telling them that they're wrong, it's literally a personal attack on them.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And it angers them to the point where they literally will just, like I said, at that point, turn around and call you the racist, bigot, homophobe, whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, I'm just trying to have a conversation with you because I disagree with you. Let's have a spirited conversation. No, now it's a personal attack.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And then that's exactly right. No, actually, I don't think that cops are disproportionately killing black people. What the fuck did you just say to me? Are you calling me? Like,
Exactly.
it's no, I think that you propose something and it's out here in the ether and we're debating the idea that you proposed, and it's not right. It doesn't stand up to facts, but you're somehow accusing them of, you're insulting their very being as a person, and that's wrong.
And then it's all of a sudden South Park with, you took our jets!
Yeah, exactly, and it shouldn't be that. We should be able to have reasonable debate on policing, because policing is a problem, and there's countless videos of cops that murder people innocently. I don't know if you watched that guy in Arizona where he was super drunk, I think, and he was kind of just fucked up, and the cops were like, he had a gun aimed at him, and he's like, get down on the ground, and he gave him all his confusing instructions. He's like, I don't know what the fuck you want me to do.
Oh, was this the guy that got shot that was unarmed?
Yeah. Daniel Shea or something like that. Yeah, and he's like, I don't know what the fuck, and he like sits up and he's like,
and then all of a sudden they just boom,
they just shoot him.
Yeah.
And when you're like, what the fuck? This guy was drunk or something, but that could happen to me. He's like, I've been fucked up countless times.
Right?
Right? Like, they're just like, what the fuck? Like, what if that happened to me? Like that.
And like
Wanna...
he was legitimately trying to comply.
Yeah, yeah. And he like sits up and he's like, I can't keep my balance.
Yeah.
And like that's when they shoot him. And so yeah, there are legitimate problems with policing for
And
sure.
that's the thing, I think that anybody, any civilized person that's listening to this could agree with, that if there is some kind of injustice that is clearly like racist in intent,
Yeah.
that we can fight that together. If there
Yeah.
is something that is clearly wrong and that it was done with like wrong intentions, we could fight that together. But it just seems like that's not what it is. It's just, it's like I said, it's so personal to them at this point,
Yeah.
that it's like, this is what I believe, and if you don't believe it, this is wrong.
Yeah.
And it bothers me, because I'm like, no, if I see something that's racist in intent, I see something that's homophobic in intent, or sexist in intent, I will fight it with you.
Yeah.
But you have to have that proven intent, and not everybody seems to agree with that. You know?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. The term racism has really lost its meaning, especially amongst the left.
Mm-hmm.
And racism and homophobic and all these terms just don't really mean anything over there. There's just, everybody's a racist, everybody's a homophobe. If you don't call people by their right names, you're a homophobe, you're, insensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really where the left loses me on a lot of things, because they have to be more critical of their own side, and they have to be more critical about their own opinion, and start looking at things rationally.
And I guess a lot of the problems that I have too, I feel bad because we keep bringing up the left, because I don't want people to think that I'm so far right-winged that I can't see any of the values or opinions that come from the left, because I do believe there are a lot of good values and opinions that have come from the left over the years.
Yeah.
And obviously I have some friends, family, things like that are very far left-leaning, that it's like, I don't disagree with everything you're saying.
Yeah.
But I forgot where I was going with this. What were we just talking about?
Just racism and words that the left uses that no longer have meaning.
Right. Why? I don't remember which direction I was going with.
All right, so transitioning away from the culture wars, another pressing topic, if you've been paying attention, is artificial intelligence in Westworld. And that is such a fascinating topic, because artificial intelligence really kind of puts the nail in the coffin on what determinism is and what free will is. And you're able to see decisions so clearly. And so just kind of getting into it, right off the bat, what do you think determinism is, J-Mo? Cheers.
Oh, cheers.
We're on our fifth drink.
I have a little water to mine. If you want some water, just feel free to.
Okay, I like it when it burns.
So determinism to me.
And this all ties into artificial intelligence, and don't think strictly along the lines of determinism. Just kind of artificial intelligence and free will and AI. Just these are loosely based concepts that you can tie it up onto.
So you brought up the topic the other day when we first started tossing around the idea of doing this podcast of free will, and I hadn't really thought about it too much. I was thinking more along the lines of free will, and maybe we can talk about doing some things about, like, with the effects of mind altering substances like psilocybin mushrooms or DMT or anything like that. But then I started really diving down this hole with it, and it really started kind of giving me just some crazy thoughts and just kind of blowing my mind a bit. So determinism, based on what I understand with it, is basically everything that is done up to and now this point that whoever's listening to it has been determined, has been essentially calculated out, has been essentially figured out by the universe. So I could set this pin down, and instead of pointing it left, it was already predetermined that it was pointed left, as opposed to me setting it down and pointing it right. So just every little thing about it has already been predetermined, which to me is kind of like, whoa, who's determining this out, and it's kind of crazy to me. But that's my understanding of the determinism. And then when it comes to like the whole AI aspect of things, it's fascinating because at that point, is it determinism? Because the AI is then at that point going to have its own essential thoughts, feelings, programs, algorithms, things like that, that it's going to go down its own path with that, and it's like, who's determining that? So it's a very fascinating subject. That's my understanding of it. But
so if you programmed the AI to respond a certain way, and the AI thinks that it's responding a certain way, who's choosing? Is the AI choosing?
that's hard to say. I mean,
Right.
it's
But what does your intuition tell you at that point?
at that point, it's I would say at the very early stages of AI, it's going to be still essentially in the hands of whoever created said artificial
Do you
intelligence.
think you could be able to tell the difference between an AI that's conscious and an AI that's not conscious?
Well, that's the hard part. How do you define consciousness?
Right.
So that's what's really hard, because at that point, where did the consciousness come from? Is it still a program at that point? Where are we going with that?
So if it's sufficiently able to trick you, what do you do at that point?
Sufficiently able to trick me at that point, I say I go and find a way to live off the grid, because that's terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm going to figure out how to farm and
Yeah.
live off of solar power. But no, I mean, it's really scary, because I think that, what is her name? Sophia? That's the artificial robot that now has citizenship with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia.
That's kind of scary
They
because...
don't force her to wear a burqa.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a whole different topic there, but...
Next week.
Exactly. But I mean, it's a scary thought, because at that point, she's still a program, but how much of that program is actually in the hands of the human versus how much of that is actually Sophia?
Her.
Yeah, exactly. And
it
it's weird.
translates because how much of you is actually you? How much of you are you actually deciding? And this is why determinism is so, not determinism, but the concept of free will is so interesting, because how much of you are you actually deciding, and how much, all you're actually aware of is your moment to moment experience.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you actually know is that you know something is happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if this whole thing is a simulation, right? Even if the whole thing, you're in the Matrix, right? Whatever crazy concept that you can think of, you know something is happening because you can feel it, right?
Sure.
Something is like to be like you, right? And so that's the only thing you can be sure of. You can't be sure that you actually picked up that cup. You can't be sure that you actually took the drink that you took, right? That you're not aware of, why you actually chose to put the pen the way that you chose to put the pen down, right? You can't be sure of any of that. But what you are sure of is the fact that you're at least there. You're at least witnessing. You're like a passenger on a roller coaster,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's the only thing that you can be sure of. And this is why free will and consciousness is so interesting, because how do you tell another person that you're actually there? That, if you're an AI, how do you tell it that, hey, I'm actually here? Like, how do you describe consciousness? How do you tell, in Westworld, when Maeve, tries to interact with other robots and
Spoiler
says,
alert.
yeah, how do you know that another person's actually, how do you know that the other person is actually alive and with it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's such a hard concept to actually figure out, and hopefully they'll figure it out in the future, but that is an interesting topic right now to cover.
Well, not only that, I think you were the person I first started talking about AI with, and it does also come along the lines of how could AI also be used as a weapon?
Yeah.
And then it turns into a whole new arms race. And who's going to develop the best AI? If China develops best AI, is that going to come around and bite us right in the keister?
Yeah.
Or if we develop the best AI, are we still going to be like, ha ha, take that, the rest of the world?
And if we develop the best AI, that China's a nuclear weapon.
Mm-hmm.
China's our nuclear power.
Mm-hmm.
China, if we develop the best AI, you have to realize that the best AI is an oracle for the best economy, is an oracle for how to win the world. right? Because their algorithms they're self-taught and they work at the speed of light. The best AI working at the speed of light is going to be able to figure out problems that would take us centuries to figure out, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because their minds work at the speed of light. Our minds work at the speed of chemistry, right? We only work as fast as the chemistry in our cells allow us to work. But AI can think, you know, exponentially. Their minds aren't limited. They're not linear growth. They're exponential growth, right? And so they can think thousands of years ahead into the future if we were to develop that AI. So if we develop that AI in Silicon Valley, right? We figured out general intelligence. We have general intelligence. We figured it out. We know how to do this. It's teaching itself. We ask it questions and it answers perfectly as to how we would want it to answer it, right? China, and not only China, but Russia and the other world powers with nuclear weapons would have every plausible condition to nuclear bomb Silicon Valley. Because that is the ultimate technology to how to win the world, and that is the ultimate technology to how to end those regimes, right? And so you're talking about nuclear warfare when you're talking about perfect AI, right? And if we develop that first and we don't have the correct political situation to deal with the fallout of, you know, developing the correct AI, we're dealing with a nuclear world, right? We're dealing with a situation where China has to launch nuclear weapons in order to stop us from invading their entire infrastructure, right?
Well, not even us actually having the artificial intelligence on its own invading their infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this already happens, right? We've invaded Iran's entire infrastructure. We have worms inside of Iran's infrastructure to, you know, put them in a, you know, catatonic state, right? I don't know if you ever watched the documentary Stuxnet, but it's an amazing documentary on how it can shut down Iranian infrastructure and how Obama shut down, you know, the nuclear centrifuges that Iran had running, and it was just strictly through a computer program, right? And it was not smart computer programming. It was just, you know, mechanical. It shuts down at a certain RPM, and the computer doesn't read what it's supposed to read, right? And it was very basic words, but it was very interesting. And so, yeah, even when you think about general intelligence, the perfect AI is going to be able to run economies and run China, Russia, the UK, all these other powers into the ground with whatever we have, because it can shut down infrastructure, it can shut down economies, it can figure out the best way to trade, and it'll leave us all in the dirt, right? And it can figure out the best exports, imports, right? However we run our economies, it's going to be better at it than we are. And if I was a foreign power and I saw, for example, if we're the US and I saw that Beijing was on the cusp of building general AI, that was the best oracle for it, what is my response as the president of the United States, right? Holy shit, it's not only going to leave me in the dust, it's going to leave me in trillions of dollars of dust, right? It's going to essentially render us just, you know, it's going to leave us without value, right? We're just going to be Senegal compared to China, right? Like we're not going to have any value because you have perfect AI telling you how to run your economy, and we're going to be valueless. And if I'm the president of the United States, how do I respond to that, right? And that is almost terms for war, right? And we don't have the political situation right now to deal with that.
You know, everything you just described, it's bringing it back around to a really silly subject, but did you ever see the movie WALL-E? It kind of made me, everything you were just thinking about right there, essentially AI running our economy, AI running our military defense, AI running literally every aspect of our lives. It's like the movie WALL-E when they're on that spaceship and the artificial intelligence is literally just running everything for them. It's like, oh, we're taking you around this track. You're going to go over to the swimming pool now. Yeah. Oh, here, you're hungry. Here, eat this now.
Yeah.
And then, you could take it one step further. Oh, now we're in the Matrix. But that's kind of what I pictured, and it's some people might be like, wow, that's great, never have to do anything again, and all of a sudden all my bank accounts and everything are taken care of for me thanks to AI. But to me, that's kind of terrifying.
And it's less that AI is going to cope with us. It's more that AI is not going to have a need for us. And AI, the way that we don't think about ants in any semblance, right? If you see an ant, you're like, oh, that's an ant. But if it's in your way, right? If you're driving down the interstate
Mm-hmm.
and you don't realize that an ant is there because you're going 80 miles an hour and there's no fucking way that you could possibly pay attention to it, right? Or if you have to build your home, right? If there's an ant hill right here in the middle of the living room, nobody's going to stop for that ant hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just building on top of it because it's what I have to get done. And that's the analogy to AI.
Ooh.
AI could completely run us over because it doesn't care what we have to think about. It doesn't care about all the same things that we're concerned about, right? It's like it just, well, there goes that person. I don't give a shit, right? It's not that it's being malicious. It's just the fact that it doesn't really care about us.
And not only that, it's trying to find the most essentially productive and cost efficient and all these different ways to
and
go
it's
about
caring
things.
about what it wants to care about. If AI is caring about, I don't know what the fuck it's caring about, but it's caring about something, and it's caring about what it wants to care about.
Mm-hmm.
And we have no say because you're dealing with the analogy of a human to an ant, and now we're here on the intelligence scale, and AI is exponentially up there, and we don't know what it's thinking about. We have no idea. We have no concept. We can't grasp it because it's exponentially more intelligent.
And if you think about it, that intelligence is so scary too, because how long does it take you to read a book? Maybe 3-4 days, a week, something like that, depending on the size of the book. We could talk about artificial intelligence doing that within a matter of minutes or hours.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just something that's becoming more and more exponentially intelligent, and that is terrifying because you're right. It just literally leaves us to essentially becoming their god, and we're in an ant. Yeah, it's a great analogy. That's never thought about it, but that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is, and we just have to hope that AI doesn't, that we don't get in the way of AI, and that's what's so troublesome. That's what's so bothersome.
Some symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, and we have to hope that if it ends the world, we can jump into the network. But even if we jump into the network, what's to say that AI is like, well, you're too slow. She's gonna leave you behind, right? And so. That's another scary thing, is that we have to configure AI in a way that aligns with our interests, and we have to make sure that AI cares about taking care of us first before we let it just run rampant.
Well, that brings it back around to the whole concept of what this conversation came back to, is free will.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the consciousness aspect of it coming around, like, does it develop a consciousness? And then at that point, what is that consciousness? Is it malicious or is it benevolent?
Yeah.
And then we have to hope that obviously it's going to be one that's going to look at us and be like, all right, symbiotic, let's work together. But you don't know. And that's where the whole free will aspect starts coming along. If that artificial intelligence develops free will, what's to stop it at that point from essentially having malicious intent? I mean, that's crazy. I never even...
Yeah, and what's to stop it? And it doesn't even have to have malicious intent. It just has to be slightly unaligned with our own interests. And this is where Nick Bostrom's paperclip example comes up. I don't know if you've heard of it, but Nick Bostrom postulated that if you have the best AI, but all it's concerned about is making the best, as many paper clips as it possibly can, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're going to have a machine that turns all of us, or any organic matter, into paper clips, right? It's just going to kill us and make paper clips, right? It's autistic general intelligence, and it's just going to keep making paper clips, right? It's a completely, sort of there's no orientation, but there's no reasoning there. It's just the intelligence, the super intelligence, thinks that it has to make paper clips, but we didn't program it that way. There's just some fault in our code, and it just thinks it has to make paper clips, right? And so it can kill all of us making paper clips, and says, I have to make paper clips, but it's not malicious, right? It's not thinking in a way, how can I perfectly harm humans? right? It's just thinking, this is what I have to do. My only goal in life is to make paper clips, and I'm sorry, but you're in the way, and I'm going to kill you now to make paper clips, right? And so it's not necessarily that AI is acting maliciously. It's just the fact that it's not oriented to how we would want it to be oriented. So we left on artificial intelligence.
So the last thing we were talking about was the paperclip theory with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this was Nick Bostrom's postulation that the perfect AI is going to, if it's autistic in any sense of the term, is going to make, if you tell the perfect AI to make paper clips, it's not going to have a notion of common sense. And it's going to make as many paper clips as it's going to make, right? And you can't quite figure out why it's making that many paper clips because it's perfect AI, right? It's, you know, exponentially smarter than you. And so that's Nick Bostrom's kind of crazy but plausible idea of what happens when you have AI that doesn't correctly align with what you're telling it.
Okay. So that kind of brings to mind the question. You brought up the word autistic. So does that mean that essentially AI can start developing personalities?
And no, more autistic in the sense that it doesn't behave quite how you would normally want it to behave, right? So autistic in the sense that it's a little bit weird and not behaving normally, right?
Okay. So if it keeps developing paper clips and it's the perfect AI, does that mean that it's necessarily a program of it? But then where does the free will or the concepts of like it's now artificial intelligence start to play into factor with that?
So the AI, the intelligence, the artificial intelligence means that it has its own goals, right? So you as a person, right, as a brain, have your goals, your motivations for whatever it is that you want to accomplish, right? You want to live a certain life, you want to have certain moods, you want to avoid other moods, right? You want to avoid pain and suffering, you want to live in related lifestyles, right? And when you map that onto AI, right, and especially when you talk about autistic AI, right, if you're telling an AI that, okay, you have to build as many paper clips as possible, right, that AI wants to avoid not building paper clips, but it wants to build all the paper clips, right? So it has its own goals, its own motivation, right? And so that's where that's at, and we can't quite figure, and the same thing with autistic people, right? They'll do something over and over. They have compulsive, personalities, right? Yeah. And so they'll do something compulsively, and you can't quite understand why they're doing it. And they're a little bit weird, right? It's like in Tyrion, Game of Thrones, where his cousin's like bashing the Beatles, right? That's a little bit of autistic personalities. And you can't quite map it onto reality. You can't quite figure out why they're doing what they're doing. So that's a little bit of the autism sense, is that the AI that is programmed to build as many paper clips just has its own goals, but it's not goals that map onto all of our realities, right? It's not goals that, that are regular, that are normal, right? And so that's the autistic sense. And then when you map it onto free will, which is a whole other topic and probably a good transition into here, right? When you map it onto free will, it really doesn't have free will, because it doesn't. All of its actions are oriented towards building paper clips. So everything that it wants to do, all of its suffering because it can't build paper clips, is just all of it's because of its orientation to want to build paper clips, right? So if you stop it from building paper clips, it's only going to think about, how can I get out of this prison to build more paper clips, right? And so it's suffering because it can't build paper clips, right? And so that's when you talk about free will, it's that's what you're talking about. It's how its goals map onto reality, right? And so,
Well, that would seem more in the line of determinism then at that point.
Yeah, it would.
Huh. That's bizarre. Because if it's so essentially hell-bent on just building paper clips to the point of even causing mass extinction on that level, that seems like that's something that would have been predetermined by it.
Well, not not predetermined in the sense that the universe is going to play out in the way that it wants to play out, right? It's just there's always a level of randomness when you're talking about quantum mechanics. When you're talking about photons and quarks and any other point particle, they're always going to behave randomly,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not predetermined that they're going to operate in the way that we think or want them to operate, right? They could appear randomly, they could not appear, right? And so determinism is based on the fact that we think the universe is just unfolding in a certain way, right? And that things couldn't have happened any other way, but that's not right, right? Statistics tells us that it doesn't happen that way. There's a certain probability that things happen in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I would disagree with the deterministic line of thinking. But also with determinism, you can make the argument that you didn't choose who you are. You didn't choose, like, the AI didn't choose who it wanted to be, right? It's just it just has a certain goal in mind, and that's where that's where it's headed. That's where it's oriented, right? It wants to make paper clips.
I like that AI didn't determine who it was going to be. That's a good point. I'm just jotting down notes.
Yeah.
All right, so when it comes to free will and your free will, for example, what are your thoughts on it? Do you believe that you actually have the free will to make your own decisions, or do you believe that everything is essentially to that predetermined aspect, or do you believe it's like a combination of both? Do you feel that some of your choices that you had over your life were already predetermined, or do you feel that every single thing that you've done up to this point was essentially something that was done by Jerry?
I don't like the word predetermined because I don't think anything is predetermined. And predetermined means that there's something at the end that kind of knows how something is going to unfold, right? But the future hasn't happened yet. So whatever I say here, right, whatever pops up in my brain hasn't actually happened yet, right? And so there could be entire variations of what I'm going to say that haven't actually happened yet. And so that's where I don't like the term predetermined because things haven't happened yet, right? Okay. But given that, I think that free will is an illusion. I think that the sense that you have the choice to do as you please, right, is an illusion, right? And I think if you were given the choice to lift, if you have your hands flat on the table and somebody says, lift your right hand or your left hand, right? We can test pretty accurately before you decide to actually lift either hand, right? Your subconscious has already decided to lift one or the other, right? And so that's the clearest example. And also when you start to factor in everything about you, right? Your genetics. You didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose what environment to grow up in. All these things factor into how you decide certain things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you actually have a decision in front of you, you didn't actually factor in all of these things that are influencing your decisions, right? So if your decision is, I'm going to choose the fat free meal or something like that, right? Like, I'm going to choose the less calorically dense meal. If you're on a diet, right? You didn't choose a lot of the aspects about you, right? You didn't choose your genetics. You didn't choose a lot of things. So at what point is the choice really yours, right? When we know that subconsciously you've already decided, and we also know that you didn't choose really anything else about you, right? You didn't choose your genetics, you didn't choose your parents, all these things, right? So at the point that you have to actually make a choice, when does you step in to the equation? And I would say never, right? I would say never. And so free will becomes a very confused argument because people want to say that you have this sort of libertarian free will that you could have chosen otherwise, right? And I don't think that that's right. You probably could have chosen otherwise, but it's a very confused answer, right? It's just so many things have to factor in to you deciding what you're actually deciding that it just becomes very confused. So that would be my answer on free will, is that we don't actually have it, but we don't really have a choice either way.
That's interesting. So, would you say then, based on everything you just mentioned right there, not actually that free will is there, but you don't actually essentially have a whole lot of say over your free will, and that not necessarily things are predetermined, but so do you think that there is at that point something working behind the scenes to essentially cause your decisions besides, and I'm talking not necessarily your genetics, your, you know, influences on life, you know, where you grew up, where you were born, anything like that. Do you think there's more that's working behind the scenes there? Or I guess I'm asking, do you see it like a higher power working with that, or no?
I don't see a higher power. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in a God
Okay.
or anything like that. Um, so I don't see a higher power working. What I do see is a lot of decision, or a lot of instances taking place that you don't have a choice over. So all of your genetics are working, concurrently, and they're working in a way that you didn't quite decide, right? Whatever decision means as a word,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whatever you actually decide, right? All of your genes are working kind of either with you or against you, right? Whatever it is that you decide to do. And, you mount that onto the fact that you have an environment that influences your choices, right? And we know that environment at least plays 30 to 40% into however you turn out as a person, right? And so all these things are working in such a way that when you actually boil down a decision, however trivial it might seem, or however life altering it might seem, right? You whatever that decision, whatever it means to take a decision, is weird, and we have to redefine it. We can't define it in a very classical sense, or you chose. Like, that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really mean anything to say you chose to do anything, because we know that there's no homo homunculus, right? Whatever they call that, the free rider, right? We know that there's no such thing as that, and we know that your decisions are being influenced by your genetics and all these things. So we have to redefine what we mean by taking a decision. And so that's ultimately my position, is that yes, you might have a decision, but we have to redefine what that means.
So, with everything you just mentioned there, does that mean that we can now, as a civilization, map the human genome, and we can essentially now start mixing with people's genetics and making them, in a lot of people's eyes, better? And I'm using quotation marks there. So, when those kind of people are essentially born, do you essentially look at that now as those people did not have any type of free will in essentially determining who they are?
The child?
The child that's born, that's been essentially
Yeah.
altered with the genomes and things like
Yeah,
that.
but that was you as a child also. Like, your parents chose to procreate, and you didn't have a decision who they decided to procreate with, right? Like,
It's true.
whoever your parents chose to be with one another, right? Like, there were certain characteristics about one another as a person that they chose to be with, right? And you are that amalgamation, right? You are the person that comes out on the other end, right? You're the meiosis of your two parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have a choice to be like your parents, right? You didn't have a choice to not be like your parents, right? And so, yeah, you don't really have a choice in figuring out your genetics, right? You don't have a choice in playing a role what your genetics are. And if your genetics are inclined to being more aggressive or less aggressive, or being more, erudite or less erudite, right? Being more reasonable or less reasonable, right? You didn't choose that. You didn't choose to be that person. It just so happens that you're lucky that you are, a very intellectually driven person,
Mm-hmm.
but you didn't choose that. You didn't choose those genetics, right? You look around and you're like, that person's a fucking retard. You're like, well, fuck. Like, okay, I guess that person was just unlucky because they're not interested in conversations like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're just happy going about their lives, not interested in conversations that are meaningful, right? And so, to a certain extent, yeah, those people are unlucky or lucky depending on what their genetics tend to be, right? And
Yeah. So everything you just made or said just makes a lot of sense. But so do you believe that there is any free choice? Because you just said that person didn't choose this, that person didn't choose that person didn't choose to be whoever they are,
Right.
essentially up to this point. So what do you believe that they have the free will over, or do you believe there is any aspects that they actually have the free will to be?
So I think, and this is where I differ from somebody like Sam Harris. I think that there's choice when you're presented with choices. I think that once you're presented with choices, even if you're not at the very kind of molecular level choosing, I think that in some semblance, right, and it's hard to define, but you do have a choice. Once you're presented with choices, you are able to choose, right? If you have a moral choice, you can choose. And yeah, obviously there's a lot of factors here, right? You're not quite deciding, right? All the things that determinists bring up, but I think it's useful to say that people do have a choice, and that's where I would stand is saying that, okay, I see all the logical arguments that determinists make, but I think it is useful to explain to people that you do have a choice, right? And so that's where I would put my
So it sounds like to me you believe in like limited free will.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't believe in. Yeah, I don't think libertarian free will is a thing. I don't think that you have a rider inside of your head kind of pulling the strings. But I do think that, like I said, once you have a choice, you can kind of choose.
So I guess would that be the argument of where consciousness comes into play?
Well, consciousness is very different than free will. And I think this would, before we dive into consciousness, because consciousness is such an interesting topic, I would like to get your
My
views
view on
free will.
Okay.
And I would like to get it, first of all, I would like to ask, what do you think? Do you think we have libertarian free will? Do you think that we have the ability to have chosen otherwise, right? So if you have two choices right in front of you, as salient as that might be, right? You can choose left or right hand, right? Do you think that we have the ability to choose truly, left or right hand? Like that's what libertarian free will means, or do you think we?
It's hard to say, but so I guess I look at it as more along the lines of the fact that we can look at a human brain on so many different aspects of the fact that I can see what synapses are firing. I can see, how the neurons and all that things are working inside your brain, but I still can't actually process what a thought is. And I can't actually determine that by looking at all the different things. If I have my hand on my right, or my right hand on my right knee, and I have my left hand on my left knee, and I decide which one to raise, you can be looking at all the different synapses, and then you still can't process what the thought is that's going to come out of my mind right there, if it's going to be left or right. So it's hard to say in that aspect of, is there actual libertarian free will? I'd like to think that there is, but based on everything you just told me, it did get me thinking that maybe not. Because you're right, I didn't have a choice on who my parents were. Don't get me wrong, my parents were wonderful people, love them, I couldn't have asked for anybody better. But all the genetics, things like that it came down to it, you're right, I absolutely can't determine anything up to that point. So it's really hard to say which one I actually believe in. I would like to believe that up to I guess I kind of with you on that whole aspect of like limited free will, because yes, there are a lot of things that aren't up to me. My hair color, my eye color, if I'm left or right handed, any of those different things, because that's all genetics. And then you can't necessarily determine if I'm going to lift my left or my right hand based on scanning my brain, looking at any of those different things. But that's I guess where it does come back down to the consciousness aspect of things. But personally, after listening to you, I think you changed me a little bit, and I think limited free will does seem to make a lot more sense. Limited in the fact that I didn't have these choices up until the day I was born, but after I was born and I experienced life for several years, that aspect, now my choices are a little bit more free will, but they are limited based on my life choices at that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that I never really thought about it from that aspect. Like I said, this is something that's been new to me, and I've only, I'd say over the last 3 or 4 days, started to really dive into that aspect. And I don't know. I guess it comes down to the fact that your mind is essentially a machine, and that it's making decisions based on best what's for your body. It comes down to the consciousness aspect that you feel like is coming down to best for who you are as a person.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
So how does that map on, so free will, so if you're on the idea of limited free will, how does that map on to justice? How would you, for example, how would you treat a pedophile? So
okay.
to preface it, right? So if you're with the concept of limited free will, right? People don't choose their genetics. People didn't quite choose their impulses, right? If you, for example, for a pedophile, right? If you look at a child and you get horny, like is that really you choosing, right? And so how would you map that onto justice? And you can extrapolate that to any other kind of psychopath, right? And if you, so like Dexter, for example, if you look at a person and you're like, I have to kill that person, right? But Dexter didn't really quite choose who he wanted to kill, right? And so the free will argument really matters when you're talking about justice and when you're talking about a sense of justice, because a lot of us have that sense of justice. If somebody does a harm against you, you want that retributive justice against that person, right? If somebody kills your sister or your brother, you're like, fuck that person, I'm gonna fuck him in the ass, and the worst possible misery that you can inflict on that person, right? But when you think about it logically, right, in the free will sense, like, did that person really choose to murder, your most beloved person, right? And so yeah, I would just pose that question, like, how would you think about it in our sense, in our justice system?
So it's kind of hard, but I guess the best way I could describe it, and it might not make sense to a lot of people, but I guess this is just kind of how my brain is processing it right now, is I look at it as kind of like a game. So in a game, let's say chess, for example, you are given so many different rules that you have to abide by in the game of chess. And you can look at that as that's for life, that those rules essentially in chess that you have to abide by are essentially the laws that you have to abide by as a human. Granted, excuse me, you are now essentially given an infinite, well, not infinite, but a huge amount of different moves or, directions, different things like that you can go. Yeah, different possibilities that you can do essentially within those different parameters. So it's coming down to, once again, that aspect of the free will is choosing which one of those parameters. Are you going to go outside the rules of the game, or are you going to go inside the rules of the game and actually play by the rules? So that's when it comes down to the whole aspect of, that's where I believe the free will aspect comes into things. Like, I know that seeing that child over there makes me horny and I'm going to go for him is wrong, but whatever, I'm going to still go for it. It's at that point, that's where I think the free will comes into play, and I don't think it has really anything to do with the whole, I don't know, genetics.
Yeah, and that's where I would disagree with somebody like Sam Harris. So Sam Harris brings up the example of Uday Hussein, who's Saddam Hussein's son, and was basically the perfect sociopath, right? He's rich and had a megalomaniac dad and could do whatever he wanted, right? So he went around raping people, he went around murdering people, and he said that because Uday Hussein didn't choose to be Uday Hussein, right? Like, Uday Hussein was just a kid growing up to unfortunate circumstances, right? He grew up as Saddam Hussein's kid, right? And that's just a shitty draw of luck, right?
Yeah, it's shitty
but
deal.
I would agree with you, because we do to a certain extent, right, barring any exceptional circumstances, we do grow up with a sort of innate morality. We all kind of know that you hit somebody, you hit a kid as a kid, and you're kind of like, I feel bad, right? You all have this, right? You know that murdering somebody is bad, right? Even if nobody has to tell you, right? And so we all kind of grow up with this innate morality, and we also grow up with this morality because everybody else is telling you, right? And so I do agree that we all are presented with choices, and the fact that you can't choose otherwise, even though your impulses are telling you, do this, do this, do this, do this, right? Like, you have to be able to control those impulses, and you have to be able to say, nope, I'm not going to do it no matter what my impulses are telling me, right? And so this is where somebody like Sam Harris would come in and say, well, actually, no matter how much willpower you think you have, the non-willpower is based on your genetics or your environment, and it's just going to overrule everything, right?
So
And
it really comes down to that whole nature versus nurture type argument.
yeah, and so his whole argument is that you don't have a choice. Everything is just kind of determined, and
It's a very deterministic.
yeah,
type
yeah,
attitude.
exactly. So that's where I would disagree. Not really, not really knowing why, but I just like I would. One, I would just like it to be a truism, even though like I would just like it to be axiomatic, even though it's not true.
Does it
right?
give you any type of comfort?
No, it doesn't give me any comfort, but I could see how it would motivate people successfully into a society that we wouldn't want to have, right? Like we would want people to be motivated correctly and saying you can choose even though the strongest impulses inside of you are telling you to act differently, right? We would want a society that is manufactured in a way where we would kind of work against people's strongest impulses, right? And so even though your strongest intuitions are telling you to do something, right? If I could manufacture a society and say nope, 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 choose differently, I would want that society, even though it's completely fabricated, right? We're not actually in that society, but that's what I would want. And so it's not a comforting fact. It's just I think that would be the best way to manufacture a society. Right?
Well, not only that, that's how a civilized society also moves forward.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so it does come back around to the whole aspect then of, like I keep bringing up, consciousness. What do you think consciousness actually means in that full aspect of free will?
Well, I don't think the two are. I don't think the two are mutually related. Right? I think consciousness is different than free will. You don't have to have consciousness in order to have free will. And the same goes for the other statement, right? You don't have to have free will in order to have consciousness. There's nothing about the universe that says that we have to have consciousness. There's no rule in the universe. It's just kind of a happy coincidence that we do have consciousness. Right? There's nothing in our genetics, in our DNA, in our RNA, right, that says you are experiencing what it is like to be you, and that's it, right? That's it. There's nothing that says that. And you can have free will, you can have will or limited will as much as you want it to be, but what consciousness means is that there is something that it is like to be you, right? And there's some familiar patterns that you can recognize within yourself that it is like to be you. You're at least aware that you're there, right?
Okay.
No matter if this is entirely a simulation, right? If this was the Matrix and you just woke up in a vat, right? It's like you're at least aware that. So Neo woke up and it was still Neo, right?
Sure.
Even though it was a different body, like he was just a computer program.
He still had all of
He
his
woke
memories.
up and he was like,
who he was.
"This is me." Like he wasn't like, "Hey, like I'm Mia." Like no, it's still Neo, right?
Sure.
And it was just like a totally different Neo, right? And that's what it means to be what it is to be you. You can still recognize yourself in that consciousness, right? You're not going to be a totally different person. And that's what consciousness is you are recognizing what it is to be you, and that is independent of free will. But consciousness is so amazing because nothing in the universe, nothing, if you really examine molecules and atoms, nothing guarantees that consciousness exists, right? Nothing. There's nothing that says, well, yeah, if you have this many atoms, if you have this many neural networks, consciousness rises out of it, right? Nothing. There's no guarantee. All we know is that you're having this experience, and it can't be an illusion because you are having it, right? And so you might be sitting across the table from me, like, just experiencing and I could be the illusion, right? I could be an entire this Truman Show experience, right? You're not actually
gross.
Yeah. You're not actually noticing, like, it's just you in this world, right? But there is something that it is like to be you, and that's what consciousness is. And there's no notion of free will here, but consciousness is that. It is a beautiful thing. But
I like it. It's a good description of it.
yeah. And the biggest problem I see with consciousness is really the problem that Alan Turing brought up, which was the Turing test. Is how do you know that something is actually going through something that is meaningful, right? Like, so we all we relate to humans because we know that at some level we're all relatable, right? We know that another human, okay, we know that we have similar machinery. But if I built the smartest computer, how do I know that it's actually experiencing something? Like, it's going through something. And how do I know that it's conscious? Right? And this is the Turing test, right? And that movie Ex Machina, right, was so brilliant because
Never saw it.
Oh, you should watch it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It essentially, it's this girl that tricks this guy into thinking that it's conscious, but we don't know. Throughout the movie, we don't know. We don't know if it's conscious. We don't know if it's actually experiencing something, right? And this is a scary thing about the future. This is a scary thing about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is exponentially smarter than us. It can work at the speed of light, right? We don't. We work at chemical levels, right? We work at interacting with molecules, and we're not working at the speed of light. Artificial intelligence can work at the speed of light. But the scary thing is that it could wipe us out, and we don't know if it's conscious. We could be the only source in the universe, right? However big the universe is, we think the universe is roughly 93 billion light years big, right? It's an insane amount.
It's not even
of
possible
space,
to comprehend,
right? You can't comprehend it, and there's hundreds of billions of galaxies, trillions of planets, trillions of stars. However big you think the universe is, we might be, by some dint of luck, the only thing that is experiencing the universe through consciousness, right? We might be the only things that are aware.
Or you can even take it one step further and say that the universe is experiencing things through us.
Yeah, we are the universe experiencing itself, right? And so, let's say let's say that's the only possibility. Let's say that's a reality. If we invent artificial intelligence and it wipes us out, well, then that you're wiping out consciousness. You're wiping out the only thing that is experiencing itself as the universe, right? And you can have this artificial intelligence that is extremely smart, is going to build whatever the fuck it's going to build, right? It's going to build something, but it's extremely smart, but it's not conscious. It's not aware of what it's doing, right? Nothing is happening upstairs, as we would colloquially know it,
Jeez,
right? And so,
crazy.
right? And so you have this super intelligence that is just doing something, but it's not aware. And the problem is that we don't quite know how to test for that, right? So you could ask me all these questions, right? And I could pass your Turing test, but do you really know? Right? Do you really know if I'm experiencing something that it is to be like you? Right? And that is something that is idiosyncratic to just you, right? It's not ubiquitous, right? And so we have to be smarter about how we develop consciousness, right? We have to know what consciousness is. And this is why consciousness is so intelligent. This is such a precious thing.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. Like, we don't know quite what it's like to be something else, right? But
That's... Whew.
yeah.
It's one of those ones that'll make you think.
Yeah.
Might need to take a couple rips of a bong and then start talking about it. Yeah, that's a... Whew.
No.
It's so crazy to even think about.
No.
I mean, there's just... Because when you were describing basically making an AI, wiping you and I out, and the fact that the universe maybe is experiencing life through you and I, that's just all of a sudden made me think like, wow, the universe literally just created its own way of destroying itself right there.
Yeah.
Or who's it to say that now we're experiencing it, but there's 8 billion light years away, some other artificial intelligence trying to experience it the same way as well.
Yeah.
And then it's just, it's
Did you
so
ever
big
play
that we
Mass
can't even
Effect?
Yeah, I did. That game was awesome.
And they built intelligence that wiped itself out. It was the Reavers, and it was just like, I'm super smart, and just destroyed civilization.
Well, isn't it also like
it was like autistic artificial intelligence. It was like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And everybody's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just gonna do it.
I feel like it.
Yeah, I feel like it. And you're like, why? But yeah, that's totally in the realm of possibility, and it's not that far fetched where you could build artificial intelligence that is stupid, but is incredibly, exponentially smarter than you, and just kills you. And you're like, fuck! Like, you have to leave little symbols for yeah. You're just fucked. Yeah, that game's
messed
incredible.
that one up. Whoops.
Yeah.
Start again.
Yeah.
Multiverse.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's a whole other animal right there too.
Yeah, the multiverse.
I guess we can leave that for
the next week.
Yeah.
Next week on.
Yeah. So to bring it home, let's try to figure out something to bring it home here. So we left it off on free will, AI, consciousness, things like that. Anyway, I had a blast.
Yeah,
this was awesome.
It was fun.
Yeah,
was super fun.
I think it sounds like we're going to try to do this again on Thursday. Jerry, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming in here. I appreciate it. Let me pick your brain.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. So, yeah. Any final thoughts? Any final?
Not really any final thoughts, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it again on next time we do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, cheers, and let's do it again.
Sounds good. All right. Well, anybody that listened to this, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.